Right, I'm going to call to order the August 11th meeting of the Board Finance Subcommittee. It's 3:31 p.m. Go ahead and do roll call. I have President McNally and Trustee Kirby, as well as myself present. So I will remember the committee's present. And we'll move to public comment on non-agenda and agenda items. I have one member of the public present. Any comments?
No comments.
All right, much appreciated. We are going to recess to closed session for conference with labor negotiators, and we will resume with this after that. It's 4:14 p.m. and we'll call the Board Finance Subcommittee back to order. There was no reportable action from closed session. We're going to move on to item 4, discussion action. And our first item is a discussion and potential recommendation of board policies to the board for consideration. These were board policy recommendations that were stemming out of our spring work for initial work plan of this committee and reviewing all of our financial processes. And Lisa, August presenting, I'm assuming.
Myself and Liz, yes. So if we want to start with BP or 3311 for bids, and if we want to pull up the red line version. This is where we had the discussion about how often we should go out for RFP or request for proposals for audit and professional services. We're not required under law to go out for RFP, but it's not a it is a best practice to do so. And we had a conversation about how often we should be doing that or not. I know we talked in here about, there were a few different numbers thrown around. And in our conversations, if we were to do it every 3 years, it is a very labor intensive. It uses a lot of staff resources. And you also are then turning over just right when your audit firm has actually now probably started to understand what your systems are, and it becomes a little more efficient. We also don't necessarily want to go too long, because then you have the potential for things to become complacent, a little, too familiar, even though you're changing out that lead auditor. Did you want to go ahead and
I'll just add that this is consistent with the best practice recommended by GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association. They're sort of our gold star. They recommend at minimum 5 years. So you want to do it within 5 years instead of the 6 years process within their recommendation.
Mm-hmm. So as a committee, we had a discussion and a review of this part of our procedures. We have the recommendation back. Any questions? Are we prepared to make a recommendation? Yes. Oh. And we'll go ahead and recommend the changes as presented. Let's go to the next policy.
All right, now if we look at, sorry, I should have actually started with 3312. That's the first one on the list. I just missed it. If we look at the red line, this is just when we're looking at authority. The board does within education code. So the second paragraph there where it says the board may by a majority vote delegate the superintendent or designate the authority to enter contracts on behalf of the district. What we don't have is a formalization of that happening. So right now there are things when there's something that's urgent in nature or smaller items, there are times where I do approve those and, bring them to the board for ratification. And the board, regardless, there's still a ratification process that's actually within the ed code. This doesn't have the ed code cited, but that's how it reads. And so we had spoken before about $15,000 being, you know, kind of a standard or what we've seen, what I've seen in other districts.
So we had this conversation and there have been some examples earlier in the year of situations where there were ratifications and there was uncertainty and there was rushes around having to get things approved. And so this was to provide clear guidance so that staff knew where that line was drawn instead of it being kind of nebulous. So any questions from the committee?
So how does this relate to consent agenda?
So it still comes to there are a couple things. One, most things still would come for ratification. Also, when you approve the vendor warrants, so if the contract didn't come, but I had signed it and it was within the threshold for approving the vendor warrants are an approval after the fact of the expenditure. So it's saying, yes, we agree with that.
But it means we may not see a separate item on it before it's in the vendor warrants, if it's under 15,000. And we're
Like all
providing
the software
confidence.
renewals, things like, you know, things like that are just kind of, you know, when you have, say, a school site doing a venue for a prom or something like that, that may fall within this.
In travel budgets for going to things that come up that have been rushed onto our agenda at the last minute, then we're like $800 items. Yeah.
Exactly, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the field trip one is probably the most common that you would just be approving the vendor warrant.
Are we comfortable with this recommendation? I am. Yes. Right, then we'll objection, send this as a recommendation to the board.
Thank you. Okay. 11, so if we look at 3,100 budget red line. So this is where there was discussion of reserve policy. Because right now with a lack of the policy only designates the minimum as required by law. And so the discussion with this committee was looking at 10% as the goal to get to. And again, also the superintendent or designee shall develop a plan to recover the fund balance, which may include dedicating new unrestricted revenue such as COLA, one-time discretionary funds, basically to rebuilding that reserve, because as a reminder, right now, we do not have a reserve. And the 10% is the cap set, but when the cap is in effect, for non-committed balances, so the board can commit above that. Did you have anything you want to talk about the 17% as recommended by GFAO?
It's again, GFOA.
Sorry.
They recommend 17%. There's like pushes and pulls on that idea for me. So one, yes, absolutely fiscally responsible. Two, we have kids who are generating the revenue, and the intention is to serve kids with those revenues they are generating, right? They mean that literally, right? They get the money because they exist in this world and they're coming to our school district. And so there's that tension between wanting to be fiscally responsible and also serving the kids that we have. And so the 10%, I think, makes sense to me in this moment, because we have to get to the place of restoring our reserve. 10% sets a nice goal for us to get to be able to focus on that responsibility and being able to demonstrate to the county and to the state that we understand our predicament. Here's one of the moves we're making to show you that we take it seriously and that we're committed to restoring and getting ourselves just out of those red marks that we're currently under.
If we only are ever aiming for 3%, we will always be in a cycle of reducing.
And when the committee had the initial conversation around this, one of the things that came was timeline, and you have to emphasize that purpose of this effort was structural and long-term policy change, but that we wouldn't be moving to 10% in years 1 and 2 necessarily, so we're setting the policy to start building in that direction. So that.
Yes, exactly.
So,
I think I had asked the question, I think I asked it last time. To remind me, from a historical perspective, has the district had a higher amount 20 years ago or whatever? Has that always been 3%? Always been the minimum or whatever the minimum is.
When I started in 2016, it was raisers age 3%. We were qualified for them too. Before then, I imagine, yeah, at some point.
yeah, I mean, by example, the city has a reserve goal of 17%. And so while they've been going through the same budgetary cuts that we have, they were able to use their reserves to pace them over a few years. So we made 20 million in cuts this year. They made 11 million in cuts this year and used some of the reserve in order to help balance that. And so it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be cuts in another down year and there's not going to be surges in an up year, but it just means that it gives us the ability to.
It lets you even it out and step into reductions rather than all at once slashing.
Buys you, sorry, it buys you a little bit of time to be thoughtful, so just
Sure.
as an example, strictly an example, if the district wanted to pursue a parcel tax, but those dollars weren't gonna come in for the next year, it gives you that time to be able to go pursue one, soften that blow for that year on a one-time basis while you went out and sought to determine, can we actually generate a parcel?
I was gonna say, actually, thinking about this, I do think I can add one insight. Is around Santa Rosa's historical enrollment. I think we had pretty heavy enrollment and then in around before I got here, there was a pretty change in enrollment patterns and decline. Something, and then around Santa Rosa said, oh, that was a lot to take on. Like, and maybe after around 2010 or something like that, or maybe before then, but I think there was some of that in history of Santa Rosa, which kind of was to the more challenging financial times. But if I remember, they said, yeah, it was all pretty popular only before that.
Questions? Before we go, I know we did public comment at the top, but I'll reopen it. Kevin, if you wanted to make any public comments before we take action on this.
No,
Any other conversation or questions?
when we, recommend this in the meeting, I'd like to make sure we're explaining it for the community.
Absolutely.
I think being clear about the fact that we're doing just doing like quadrant 2, Stephen Covey analysis, we're doing the quadrant 2 work for being ready to make sure we don't end up in a situation like this again this year and next year. Obviously, our focus is on the 3% in program provisions, and we're not going to be allocating 10% of the budget overnight. So I think but if we don't do the policy work now, then it won't be in place.
It doesn't set the goal. I don't know what we're aiming for.
With that, any objections to recommending this to the board?
No.
Unanimous consent to recommend this to the board.
Well, I think that took care of all of our VP work for this session.
Excellent. And I know, it seems a little small for the scope and the amount of work that we did, but I do want to recognize, we had 5 fairly in-depth information sessions, dozens of staff come through to review every aspect from our basic financial procedures through our auditing, through everything that we were doing, and to have an outcome like this comes from that level of detail and work. And so, Lisa, you're leading that team through that entire process. So thank you for that, and all your team members that came in, and all the directors and everyone else who helped us do this.
It was a very thoughtful representation, even though there aren't a lot of word changes, it really, the impact of those words, the impact of the language of the policy is important in setting the tone and the expectation going forward that fiscal matters in setting, in really being able to offer our academic enrichment programs. So, thank you.
With that, we move to item 4B, and this is discussion item on fiscal stabilization. And to set the tone, our discussion item here is about the process of fiscal stabilization. So last year, when this process happened, this committee didn't exist, and the board was not, was not through a committee involved, and so we wanted to have this as an item to talk about the structure, the expectations, and the appropriate places for the fiscal stabilization committee, which will have all the representatives of stakeholders and continue advising the superintendent. And then this committee, which obviously has a strong interest in helping provide input, guiding, and supporting that process. So with that, Luz?
Yeah, everybody rhymes with juice, Spanish for light. Right, so, it thought hard about your question of sort of like, how can this committee be supportive of those efforts? And the things that came top of mind for me, fall in a few areas. So one, in putting these in order, it's cash management and budget management. We've talked a lot about budget management over the years, especially as the district has gone through a round of the productions. That cash piece feels particularly important to me right now. Cash is the reason that districts become insolvent. It's what causes used to be the state, now it's the county to step in and essentially take over a school district. And so for me, it's top of mind. And I think because it's top of mind for me, I want it to be top of mind for you as well. And so finding those ways of taking our fiscal stabilization plan and incorporating both of those pieces. So it'd be budget management with things like reductions and enhancements, as well as the cash conversation. I would say for the current year, there's enough indication of the distress that makes me think something like a hiring freeze or a spending freeze is something worth considering. And so I've started to talk to the procurement team about what a spending freeze might look like. I will start talking to HR about what a hiring freeze might look like. No decisions. I want to be super clear about that. No decisions, no recommendation, but it's just in looking at all of the information, that's where my mind is going at the moment of like, let's be ready and let's be thoughtful about what some of those adjustments might mean for us in the current year. Another place that I see opportunity for this team and this committee, as well as the advisory committee, is the focus on what do we do to maintain or increase enrollment. Usually we talk about improving enrollment. I think some energy and some thoughts and brain power into maintaining them, right? We've got families with us. What do we need to do to ensure that they return to us, that they stay with us, and we continue to be their choice? The improvement of attendance. We spend based on enrollment. We generate income based on attendance. So there's always that gap between the two of them. So whatever we can do to reduce that gap feels like very critical work for us. And so thinking about attendance in particular, and then a subset of attendance is reducing chronic absenteeism. There's lots of reasons for it, right? Both on the way we generate revenue is one. It is where our school sites that's where teaching and learning is happening. And so if we don't bring them in, it means a couple of things. So one, it means that all of that investment we made in our teachers and our school sites, we're not getting a return for it because they're not there. And two, it usually means we end up spending more because they weren't in attendance, right? If we look at some of our populations of students who go on to have IEPs, absenteeism is one of those indicators. It's one of those connections, right? Our foster youth have some of the worst attendance rates. They have some of the highest rates of being on IEPs. That's not an accident. Those things are all related. And so making sure that we're getting the most out of our investment that way is important. And I've got ideas on how the advisory committee can sort of, I want to make them ambassadors for us.
So I was present at the advisory committee through the last, leading up to my appointment to the board. And I think one of the challenges that I experienced was the committee not feeling like it had a clear direction on what to focus on or input. And I think a well-deserved sense of having deja vu of being present in the same conversation, making the same recommendations, not feel heard or responded to. And so I think you talk more about the intent on the process, how that focus, that real work. I know we have an invigorated potential for participation from the new parent applicants and folks that became more aware of the committee during this last process. So what's the thought on how we're going to give them, you know, a real ability to make an impact here, and then how this committee can be a part of that?
So for the advisory committee, I envision they would still maintain that role they had, essentially like previewing some of these solutions and sharing some of their insights and thoughts on it. So it gives us an opportunity to react to and think about them. So it's helpful to have them as a thought partner that way. For this other piece on enrollment, attendance, and chronic absenteeism, the way I see it is it could be, I'm excited to know they were looking for a specific charge because I have that for them, like to be able to be thought partners in how we work on those three and then serve as ambassadors for us, right? So they have that responsibility, that task assigned to them of going out into the community and speaking to these pieces. There is an attendance plan that we had last year that will be internal one that'll be updated for the current year. And so I want to think about how we take that attendance plan, how we maybe create some actual goals on what it means to maintain enrollment, what it means to increase enrollment, what it needs to improve attendance, what it needs to reduce absenteeism. I sort of find when we give ourselves actual goals to work from, we work at them differently to be able to give a committee that sort of task to be able to help us work through and actually be part of the implementation process.
Yes, so when we've been talking about this, I was very excited to hear that piece of it. And just as, you know, we were talking about earlier, in our fiscal stabilization, and Luce has been getting familiar with what was adopted by the board and what those projections were. And this is not necessarily tied to that committee, but really looking at the plan that came out of that committee last year is the way that we hold ourselves accountable to that and checking in on what's real or what isn't in cabinet in the areas that each of us are responsible for in that fiscal stabilization plan. So for example, talking about the work that happened with in specifically special education and the implementation of several of those different pieces. And, you know, we're now at 22 out of district placements with us for revenues, you know, we're really becoming that regional operator for special education, where we were successful in getting agreement from CSEA to change the salary rates, which then help us to reduce those contract costs. The progress on the CYBHI billing, those pieces actually, you know, we set the expectation in that plan, and now we are monitoring and inspecting what we expected to make those adjustments, and we'll know, are those real, or do we need to adjust our updated fiscal stabilization plan to make up for something that's not real in there or not realized in there as of yet? Or are there areas where it's a bigger impact than what we projected? So that's
Just your diet, you know, having actual goals. I like that. Not to put you on the spot, but do you know, dealing with actual numbers, like either percentage or the number of chronic absenteeism post-COVID, obviously, but for the last few years, like how many in our district, what are we talking about? You know,
I
like,
guess that 23, 24 was that like 32%?
Yeah, and we've made progress. We've definitely been making progress there, but continuing to monitor that. And as we talk about the goals for fiscal stabilization, if we want to think of it in how it ties into our academic side, it is really focusing on quality instruction in the class, in first best instruction. As Liz was saying, it's gonna cost us much more when we're having to remediate and do, tier 2 or tier 3 interventions versus what are we doing in the classroom to have kids engaged? So those are all pieces of that. The more incremental growth we can make in a reduction in our chronic absenteeism, the better the academic side is going to show, as well as our fiscal side. So it all ties together and helps us to be able to provide that. I don't know the numbers offhand. I know Stacy tracks that more closely than anyone else.
Right.
Most recent data on the dashboard is 26.2%.
So not where we want to be.
right,
I'll note, I described them all differently, like they all get their own little header, because I think the solutions to each are different. So maintaining enrollment will look one way, increasing enrollment looks another way, improving attendance looks another way, reducing chronic absenteeism. So they're different solutions, they're different kids and different demographics that get stuck in each of those.
And so is the thought to have the fiscal stabilization committee help provide inputs on what levers you can pull to actually move those numbers?
I think depending on how we get ultimately to the makeup, I think we're gonna have some parents in there, makeup maybe might look different. I think the thought partners on what it is we do and then what we implement and going out there and actually supporting that implementation process. In my experience, one thing that tends to happen when we come up with ideas is it gets stuck in a part of the organization. And so in my mind, this advisory committee could be an opportunity to ensure that those tentacles sort of go out and reach all the places it needs to, including the school sites, down to the classroom and the parents.
I agree that the parents are definitely a critical part to that too. If they don't understand the importance of it, they yeah, you're fine, just stay at home for their. It's really get them engaged also to help us with that. I think it's.
It's not, it's barely a common misunderstanding amongst parents is that that's not as costly to the student. You miss class when you're like in kindergarten or first grade, because you're playing, right? It matters more when you're in high school. And that's just not the case, right? And so helping folks understand that this is what we're doing all day long in school, and this is why you want your child to be in school every day.
Yep.
And I think we made some progress last year with awareness in our community, and I think that's really the right, launching pad for us to jump off on.
There's also one misconception that the parent might think that the student has to be there for a full day. But they still get attendance if they're there for part of the day, which even shorter. So if you're out 3/4 of the day, and you think, oh, I'll just keep them out the rest of the day, or that's get them there at least a quarter of the day, and we'll get the financial benefit from it.
And they get that engagement, or even if it's a part of the day, it's better than an entire day.
Or don't schedule dentists and doctor appointments, right, if not necessary during the school day.
Right.
Tell the dentist and the doctors that.
I mean, by some of that engagement and understanding is we have some of our providers now who understand that difference and are being a little more mindful in the way they schedule appointments, but that's an area that we can tap into further.
when are you planning on forming and starting the committee's work?
Yes.
That's, we're getting up and running. So-
Yeah, I would anticipate maybe a first meeting from September, depending on like the work we can get done in the month of August. But I think that figuring out the makeup of the committee first, probably the next critical step.
Because it is going to look a little bit different than it has in the past.
And then for our work and in being a touch point, obviously doesn't necessitate the full board meeting, but we can get some input in there. When would it be appropriate for us to hear about the progress of the committee?
I don't think I know that. Do we typically do after every advisory committee?
This committee
this
didn't
is-
exist before.
Right, so that's something.
Yeah.
that
That's
we-
why I'm asking the question.
We haven't had that discussion
Uh,
yet.
Oh, it's for the advisory committee to inform this committee.
This committee, the last time the advisory committee existed, the board didn't have a finance committee.
Right.
So I'm just asking the question, I mean, the answer can be it's not even appropriate at all.
Yeah.
I'm asking this is the structural conversation of how does this committee support the work of that committee? And I think my personal experience and being on it was that there were waypoints where touch-ins that didn't need to be full things would have been helpful.
Yeah, I think when we were looking at particular things and it was, oh, how is the board going to feel about this? Because obviously, yes, it's advisory to the superintendent, but ultimately it's
Right.
my recommendation to the board. And there were some times where it would have been helpful to have an idea, kind of test the waters on some of,
Yeah.
what some of the board thoughts were on particular things. To focus on this or this, that.
So the question, I mean,
Mhm.
does that make sense with your current vision for it? Or is it just good for us to be aware of it and we should anticipate the finance questions here? I want to make sure the lines are clear. So.
Yeah, I have thoughts, but maybe we should talk about it first. I don't think that, right, if that it's advisory to you matters.
Yes, in that, otherwise, then we are, and that's, I think, something that we need to think about, because it does make a difference of, okay. Are we agendizing and doing hybrid and all of those things? What does it look like? What's going to be the most productive? I think that's the biggest thing, is what's going to be the most productive.
Okay.
And for the members of it, obviously, we want to make sure that they're feeling like their time has been
Is valuable.
done.
Absolutely.
And it's contributing to something that we're actually working towards.
Few more thoughts, especially like with the role of this committee, what can be most helpful. There is, just given where we are with the budget, given where we are with cash, the process of additional intervention is going to come, and with it will come new terms, new expectations, new processes, procedures, that sort of thing. And so I think this committee might be helpful, sort of being that first run of, this is what it means if we have a fiscal advisor assigned to us. This is what it means if we receive a lack of going concern determination from the county office of ed. And so this could be sort of that first place we have that conversation before it goes to food board.
Yeah, I think that's definitely our. We're doing well in time, so, unanimous consent to open back up for public comment, because
Can I turn it?
we have time and I have Catherine here and I'm not gonna turn down the opportunity, so. We'll go ahead and reopen for public comment.
Thank you.
I think as a member of the committee, I think, and also in retrospect of last year, one of the things that didn't seem to tie together at all is the LCAP process and the committee. So a lot of the movement that I knew was happening for a reason, like all the counselors getting moved into the LCAP. And then, jobs eliminated and recreated in the LCAP using title funds. Those are something that the fiscal committee never talked about and didn't understand, and that's something that the vast majority of the community didn't understand. It's certainly something our counselors didn't understand. And I think somehow folding the LCAP process into the fiscal stabilization committee, and I don't know where the overlap is, but it's such a huge part of how we spend money that seems to be really lost and hidden, not intentionally, but it seems to be like not transparent, the LCAP process. So I think if we could make those two things work together, I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we identified a lot of challenges with the LCAP
Right,
process and people not even understanding what LCAP means, what LCAP means, so.
right.
Right, or the ways that we gather input, because I think we only have recognized the formal gathering of input for LCAP when actually it's part of the fiscal stabilization process. We
It
were talking
absolutely
there
is.
about prioritization. When we were talking, when we were having our town halls or all of the other pieces. But yes, we weren't overt in saying, this is part of the process that we use in developing that. So I think that's really, really valid feedback. So, anyway.
If I can, another thing that it's always like, where does the circle start and close? Is, so much of what we were doing at, let's say, the consolidation meetings was, this is still not sure because the board has final decision. So we can't really talk about it, and the board makes the decision, and then it's, well, the board made the decision, so we just have to do what the board decided. And at no point, it's not quite real because the board hasn't decided, so we can't really talk about it. But it's so real after the board decides that we can't really talk about it. And at no point does there seem to be a chance to say, what is this fiscal, what does this do for us fiscally? Let's imagine that the board makes this decision. Can we scenario that out, or can we just talk about it, realizing that it might not happen, because there doesn't seem to be a place for that, right? And I was on all the committees last year, and none of them did it seem to be like, can we just play that out in our minds in a scenario kind of way to see, because it was like I said, it's like, nope, board hasn't decided yet, so we're not.
siloed
Yeah.
in the way. in the
And then as soon as the
information
board
discussed
was
and
having, 42 meetings in February and made the decisions, I think you guys had like 12 meetings that February, yeah.
It was a lot.
It was a lot. I can't remember what it was.
Many.
Yeah,
Um,
multiple times.
and then it was like, well, this was the board decision, we just have to let it, we have to implement it. And at no point was there ever okay, but how does that help us? How does that look like? What are we actually saving? Where is the money being rerouted to? How does that fit into our fiscal stabilization? Just kind of, let's talk
Closing
about
the
it,
loop.
yeah.
I mean, I think in Catherine's articulating the experience that I think that led to this committee, but also the point of this item, this agenda, which is how do we take these lessons learned from those conversations? We're gonna have a reinvigorated group of folks that are coming on to fiscal stabilization. Hopefully reinvigorated board, since most of us are now new within 3 years. And how do we make sure that the conversations are happening are real? They are inclusive of all these ideas, but they're also efficient and functional. So, yeah, thank you for articulating that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll bring it back to the committee for questions, comments. Anything else?
Just, I'll continue just reiterating, the priorities, which are academic, everything is it's with what we have. We're bringing things into what's within our means, so academics and enrichment being first and foremost, safety and rebuilding trust. So I think the ongoing conversations, the transparency, really sets us up for success with that. It's going to be a really There are a lot of challenges. It's going to be a tough year. Thank you.
We'll move to item 5. We don't actually talk about item 5. It's informational items. We still have our terms and budget process overview item there for folks that are interested. 5B is a new item, and it was to put on the agenda all the upcoming meetings for 2025 for this committee. And so we're tracking that on the agenda as well as the calendars. Note that our next committee meeting will not be on Labor Day, but will also be on the second Tuesday of September. I'll be getting some pancakes down to Labor Hall if anyone wants to meet on that day, but it won't be here. We'll move to item 6, which is approval of meeting minutes for our meeting on June 2nd. Folks had a chance to review the minutes. I believe folks were present for that one, double checking.
I don't think I was.
Absent, all right. So Mark, if you can make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve the minutes for the,
What day was it?
June
6/2.
June 2nd meeting of 2025.
All right, I'll go ahead and second it, any objection? No objection, it passes unanimously. And with that, we will go ahead and move to adjournment at 4:55 PM.
Thank you.
Okay.